Right, I think we're live. Good, right. Welcome everyone. I've been tasked with introducing everybody. My name's Nick Maybe. I'm the founder of a coffee roastery in London called Assembly. And I do some other stuff with coffee. We've got Rodolfo. You want to say hello?
Hey.
Tell us about yourself a little.
I guess I'm a sixth generation coffee producer from El Salvador. And I'm running some family farms that I inherited from my father, doing some processing. We buy cherry from other producers. So I guess, we're going to talk about adulterations in coffee. So, I'm involved in processing. So it's something I can talk about. And then I made an importing company in Europe. So I do direct trade with a lot of roasters. Like, in fact, you two guys work with us. So I guess I get to see the processing side, and then the side of like speaking with roasters and finding out what they want what type of coffees they like. So I think I have that both side perspective.
Yeah, certainly. Awesome. And Ben?
I'm Ben. I'm the co-owner of Manhattan Coffee Roasters, based in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. Like Rodolfo said, we work together. And I've been a competitor in the past, etc. Just in for the ride.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to pretend that I'm talking to like an audience, right? Because this is what, the third attempt at this. Not like we haven't failed attempts. We just wanted to feel out how to kind of have this conversation. And the conversation we're trying to have is about infused coffees. And every time we do this, inevitably we end up trying to define what infusions are anyway. And more to the point, or further to the point actually, we go on to try and define what the nuances in processing actually mean, and acknowledging that there's a lot of gaps in information about fermentation in general. So I think it's no surprise that there's so many kind of divided opinions on infused coffees, right? But if we start from the definition point of view, I mean, if I take my definition of infused coffee versus, let's say, a finely integrated, well-processed coffee, I can't help but escape the fact that I sense or perceive an inherent value in being able to achieve a flavor in coffee that is, like you said before, Ben, like almost beyond what is actually possible without some sort of element of adulteration. But the difference is, I guess, that if it's integrated to the point where all elements of the coffee benefit, then I like it. It just so happens to be that not many coffees can actually achieve that. I've bought one set of infused coffees that are outstanding. All of them I don't like. But I guess people's gripe with infused coffee from the get-go is both it stems from like this purist argument about, coffee should be coffee and it shouldn't be about profit.
The idea that it's unnatural. True.
And then the other one is transparency, which again we'll get onto that later, but that's the kind of irony of there's an inherent irony in there, I think, or contradiction from buyer to grower. But I wonder, Rodolfo, you're the closest to, you've taught me a lot about processing, like more than probably anyone I've ever met. So I guess it would be more valuable to hear from you about what your understanding of infusions versus fermentation is, or where the lines get blurry.
Yeah. Well, I would say it at the very basic beginning, it would even get blurry between people who discuss if washed coffee or natural coffee are like the pure coffee. So I don't think as an industry we even agree on that. What would be like the standard coffee from which we start? But then like getting into very like subtle points of what's like a fermentation or an infusion, I would say we've been playing around with fermentations with kombucha, and I think like I found kind of like a boundary there in which so basically kombucha is a community of microorganisms that's very stable. They create an acidic environment. It's a community of yeast and bacteria. So I thought it was a very stable environment in which you can put the coffee into, and you can guarantee that those microorganisms are going to survive and thrive and actually affect the coffee. So where I see the boundary there is, like, for example, if I do a traditional washed and I take away all the mucilage of the coffee and then put like the very clean parchment into the kombucha liquid, there's not going to be a lot of sugars in the coffee for the microorganisms to react with. So it would be mainly an infusion where the parchment is absorbing the flavors from the kombucha. But if I throw in like a honey processed coffee into that liquid, then it has all the mucilage stuck to it, which first of all, it acts as a barrier preventing absorption of flavors, but it causes a reaction because all those sugars in the mucilage are food for the microorganisms. So it's a back and forth where the microorganism takes sugars from the bean, creates acids, and then the acids end up inside the bean. So that's sort of, like, where's the boundary? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could say that every fermentation in coffee is some degree of the same process, especially if you're talking about like leachiviate processes like that, where you have like a liquid solution surrounding like any kind of coffee, whether it's parchment coffee or natural coffee. There's going to be some sort of absorption that is going to happen, and microorganisms are going to be going berserk in a tank filled with like liquid and sugar. Whether like using a SCOBY like a kombucha, I mean, obviously that's like a pretty rare natural occurrence. Like the most common thing with fruit is that they attract yeasts mostly because of like the heavy sugar load. So yeah, you're going to have all kinds of microorganisms anyway as well, but like the dominant fermentation in coffee is always going to be a yeast-based fermentation.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I guess I wonder whether with the people don't associate fermentation with washed coffees, right? Period. And that probably is something that we need to address, because most of the time the best washed coffees objectively have a longer element of fermentation, whether
objectively, yeah, maybe.
I think so. Well, let's put it this way. I mean, if we just acknowledge the fact that there is a biomechanical necessity for fermentation of coffee, which everyone knows, breaking pectins down and blah blah blah, and the fact that most of the time is just a proxy for the temperature, whether you're high altitude or low, right?
Yeah.
Then I guess it's those things in between that often happen by accident that create the most astonishing things, and whether we call it a washed or not is kind of only now really being kind of brought to the surface, because everything seems to become a lot more kind of diversified, right? I guess the point I'm trying to make, just listen to you guys talk there, was, I guess I can't escape this purist argument thing, which leads us down this road of like the real need to standardize things, or at least define them, so we can at least have a starting point. Because if you're coming from a purist point of view, and you don't, in terms of I don't like naturals because coffee should taste like coffee, right? What is that person actually saying? And if you treat
it tastes like coffee, like, really?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So but I wonder whether the problem is, like, if you treat the coffee bean as just a vessel for flavor, then I guess there's an argument that you can cheat and put flavor in it, right? Through I don't know.
I mean, that's also natural. That's natural processed coffee. Like,
but going back to what Nick mentioned about washed coffee, I think it's interesting. Let's say, like, in the more like the small producers areas, allow for more spontaneity or like accidental stuff to happen. So I grew up with like El Salvador system, like around the Santana area. It was big mills with like an actual schedule. So everything was structured. You depulp at a certain time, you wash the coffee at a certain time. And then like traveling around Colombia, meeting small producers who process coffee at home, like, you know, a lot of the winners of Cup of Excellence are people that had an accident, that basically they went to the market and they left the coffee sitting in the tank for a bit longer and it got a little bit fruitier. And that coffee stood out from the other caturras. And, you know, so
well, that's dead right. Okay, let's focus on that a bit, because I think that is where it gets murky too. And I wonder, I might be wrong, but I assume that when people drink coffees like that, they tend to think more about the provenance of probably the variety or the geolocation of the farm. They don't really acknowledge that mistake in the you know what I mean? Because it's as if people expect there to be this inherent quality in coffee, regardless of any of the fermentation element. Do you know?
Often it's not mentioned though. Like it's sold as, I mean, if you're talking about in the past, it would just be sold as washed.
This is exactly what I'm saying though. So, but without people acknowledging that, then I guess drinkers might think that there is some sort of inherent characteristics to chase after in the coffee itself, you know?
Yeah, like as if there was more to give, but through like some sort of heroic level of farming that probably is at the same degree as everyone else that is around that single farm as well. I mean, practices aren't that wildly different across the board.
You know, I think it also happened with naturals. I guess like so-called anaerobics or macerated coffee. You can think like, okay, like it took a long time to get to the raised bed for drying, and it just sat there maybe for a day or something, and that allows for like enzymatic transfers of aromas from the skin to the, you know, so like when we're looking at these processes like that, would those be considered adulterations? Or
only by your standard definition, like of what something could be.
Well, I think that's where some of the argument starts for some people. Obviously, with the advancement of, and the, you know, it's only the last 10 years has seen people actually really invest and care about fermentation in coffee, period. And carbonic maceration is probably the most famous kind of manifestation of this. But I think, so I guess people that are against strict infusions are ones that kind of don't perceive it as a legitimate way to process against a more complex kind of pathway to the same cut profile, I guess, as as controlling a fermentation with a bunch of controlled measures. What I'm trying to say is, it's no surprise to me that now we've got all these relative advancements in processing, and access to more resource, fermentation tanks, controlled environments. We've got control now, right? It makes sense to me that people are exploring fruits, for instance, because often the end result is people like coffee that tastes like a specific thing. Therefore, let's just not put that specific thing in it. And I guess if you've got a problem with coffee tasting like a specific thing, like a strawberry, for instance, and you can achieve it without adding strawberry, then somehow it's a more legitimate way of doing things. But I just wonder, I just don't think people realize how hard it is to get coffee to taste like a specific thing. Because often when you do, 99% of the time when you do try and do that, it tastes not like that thing.
Yeah. So a few points there about legitimacy, and I think we're kind of like operating in the dark, and there's really no rules until you get into a competition, right? Because I can do whatever I want in a farm. There's no supervision at all. And then I just sell it to the roaster. And I think so much coffee is moving around that no authority is going to be checking, so people can add whatever they want to the coffee and no one's really going to check. except if you get into competitions like Cup of Excellence, where coffees are like scrutinized a bit more. And that's where kind of like controversies arise, because I guess, you know, we don't know what the limits are of fermentation. So it's easy for a producer, you know, let's say if I add cinnamon to my coffee and then I say, oh, I achieved it through carbonic maceration. You know, what do you know? Like, how can you disprove me? Yeah, and then
I mean, there are microorganisms that produce stuff like the taste of cinnamon, like in industrious fermentation. I mean, whether you have them might be a different thing, but like, yeah, like even then, how would you be able to say you do or do not have that microorganism in abundance? And if you used it, like in the sense of like you used a SCOBY to ferment coffee, that's not, I mean, that's just another additional microorganism in the slurry of, you know, material that you're working with. There's, you know, a plethora of producers working with cocktails of microorganisms now, because they're more reliable than just having unadulterated wild biome material coming in.
Yeah,
You know?
and like that, I think the more, you're dead right, both of you there. Yeah, harnessing and kind of exploiting, being able to control the the microorganisms is essentially what we're talking about. But it's not, and we can do that now, and people are, right? And there's a obvious advantage there for everyone, mainly for producers, to be able to kind of achieve a consistency and be able to consistently be able to diversify their crop, let's say, or plots of land by utilizing this. And then the point on the competitions, that was a really good point. I wonder, you know, there is a very prominent anti-infuser in Australia, and I wonder if that person is concerned whether there are coffee producers with a competitive advantage, therefore people have a competitive disadvantage when it comes to utilizing this. And I wonder if that's one of the main concerns. I don't think it is at all. But I wonder if that's a relevant argument to say, like, why it's unfair for people to compete on other playing fields. So do you think that's a relevant point? Do you think people's pushback to the infusion thing is the fact that they think it's quite simply cheating?
I think it's relative to the competition.
Right, but let's say outside of the competition.
But then that's just regular market. So, you know.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's just an event.
You're just selling coffee at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think in practical terms, it all comes down to honesty. With like a lot of things in coffee are all based on trust. Like, you know, we trust an exporter to tell us what farm this coffee came from. You know, so, you know, I guess we could spend a lot of money in a lab to find out if someone adulterated a coffee or not. But in the end, like in practicality, in most situations, it's just about a producer telling you what he actually did. And it seems that some people are very open about sharing what they do, and other people see it as it's kind of like their secret. You know, I came up with this way of doing things, and why should I share it? Then everyone's going to copy me, and I lose my way of having a distinct product.
That's also a real thing, like that the secret out on making a particular product in coffee happens, and people take it and start selling the same product.
Yeah, but it's like, it's kind of expected that, you know, the producer should be naked and exposed and just like say everything. You know, when in other industries, it's like, you know,
the roasters are definitely not required to do that.
Yeah, that was one of that's the irony and contradiction I referred to earlier, this kind of expectation that, you know, IP and the lack of regulation involved in coffee in general is all, you know, it's an unfair burden. The burden's always on the producer, it seems. But I just think, you know, if we're talking about like why are people infusing coffees, there's clearly a need to create value for the producers. That's why they're doing it. And they obviously see a market for it, right? I guess the long term,
yeah.
The long term potential. Yeah. No, all good. The long term potential of that is kind of remains to be seen. But let's say in 10 years there is enough scale in coffee processing like this to produce like extremely large lots consistently of, you know, really high scoring adulterated coffees. I wonder if, you know, I don't know how I'd feel about seeing that on a supermarket shelf. If someone could legitimately say this is strawberry coffee, let's say, and is widely accessible and cost effective to produce, you know, I wonder whether people would like it. I assume that they would love it.
Well, that's where we get into this point of where it's viewed very differently if you add flavor before the drying or after the roasting, right? Where it seems like, you know, if a producer is adding fruits and creating these flavors, it's like this very interesting innovation, and it's almost like a hero who's like creating something new, when in the end result for the consumer, like you could just grab a vanilla spray, spray it on your roasted coffee, and for the consumer, like, you know, whether you add it before or after, like the drink is still gonna, you know, it's gonna taste a certain way, but it's seen as like something very cheap to do it post roast, and it's seen as innovative to do it at the producer level. So I wonder why there is that distinction there when the result might just be the same.
I mean, it's just an opinion, but probably because like cheap coffee sold roasted is commonly the one that is also sprayed with flavoring, because it's the easiest solution to make it taste different. And it's also, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if strawberry coffee exists. I mean, I'm not being out of my way to find it. So
I might just Google it.
But yeah, like I think that's the connection there with it being associated to being cheap. You know, because you're probably not going to see like an 85-point Colombian washed getting sprayed with strawberry flavoring, because you don't need to. Like, you don't need a high quality coffee to achieve the same output. So if anything, actually, I would say it would actually make it worse, because you have too much of the original flavor, or like that, you know, like high-end coffee has a lot of, you know, material in it. And if you know, like, you know, we talk about integration on like a processing level, where it's like the combination of flavor or like adulteration, whatever you want to call it, like processing and the natural product, and they work harmoniously together. Whereas, like, you know, if you were spraying something and you had too much flavor and it's like, oh, it's not strawberry enough, it's like, well, I'm gonna buy like a 79-point coffee because it doesn't have any flavor. Like, they just kind of taste like sweet, and they sort of taste like, you know, coffee taste. So they're the perfect product to lay on like another thing.
So what would happen if someone figures out how to do this on a large scale at the producer side? And let's say you're a huge producer in Brazil of like really low quality volume coffee, machine picked, and then you just soak it in a tank with all these flavors, you know, and you add some floral notes, you add some high acidity, you know, and you just make these really complex coffees in a tank, and then you're able to sell containers of like, let's say like a floral geisha made from really cheap.
Well, I mean, that's one of the possible outcomes, right? That's what I meant before by saying, like, if it becomes ubiquitous, if it's achievable. I would argue that it's not, because, and I'm probably wrong, but I've never tasted coffees. I've tasted one set of coffees that were produced last year from Colombia that achieved something quite remarkable. And they were openly infusing, but it was also utilizing wine yeast as a starter and some pretty intense kind of methodology. It's not as simple as throwing coffee and fruit together and bam. And the coffees were pink bourbons, so high quality anyway, right? And to the other point, but the other point is that,
sorry.
No, it's all right. But the other point to be, I think the answer to the first question was, why do we legitimize it from the producing end, is quite simply because that is the realm in which this industry is obsessed, right? The provenance and the mystery of coffee farms. And it is also the realm where producers have the scope to innovate. So it makes sense that they would innovate in processing. And it makes sense that the industry would embrace that, right? But also, we've all dabbled and, I certainly have championed lower altitude katoras and stuff being like highly pretty processed from a natural point of view in order to increase. Mr. Steve, Ben, remember Panama, man? That coffee was.
Yeah, we buy a lot of low altitude Brazils that I've had them washed as well, and I guess like those coffees aren't incredible as washed coffees. I'm talking about coffees at like 400 meters. Mr. Steve was at 1,000. Sure. Low for Panama, but it's not like a hill by the seaside. But you're right though, to make those coffees like more valuable in the sense that they give more to like flavor wise. Like anaerobic natural and longer anaerobics do really make those coffees way better and far more interesting.
Yeah, exactly, and I guess
they kind of have to do it.
Yeah,
because otherwise.
So I guess my point is that I don't acknowledge the distinction, or I don't think it's a legitimate one to say that that's any different to an infusion.
It's just that's a long ferment natural. And this comes back around to like the definition of what infusion is, and that there isn't really, I know like we've already said this a few times now, like there are no like kind of, it's weird that the standardization of what things are coming from like outside of the producer realm, like often, they're defined by books that we've read and probably just by witnessing practices, not a collective decision that like these are the rules that we go by, unless you're talking about like people that do courses to like process coffee, but then they just do what is recommended often. So there's no like countrywide, like it's not like wine where you'd have like what is the Italian one? I can't believe I'm forgetting this. Was it VSOP and stuff like that? Not VSOP.
Oh yeah, the designations.
DOP. Yeah. DCOG as well. Like they have rules, and if you break those rules, then you will not get that
you have to label
labeling.
Table wine.
No. Yeah.
Yeah,
and
but
then other places like Rioja and stuff, it's like if you don't have this grape in this place, then it's not Rioja wine. Like
it could be the same for Hawaiian Kona, I guess, Jamaica Blue Mountain, possibly.
Oh, for like the fancy tiers. I love those.
Yeah, exactly, man. But, this is. I remember going to actually no, I won't get into that. I was going to tell a story about Myanmar and at a commercial coffee farm, and they didn't even know what the SCA was. They were like, they've got their own grading system. There was no benefit to them because they bought and sold all of their own coffee and like didn't have to do anything else. They're like, this is our grade 1, 2, and 3 coffees, and I'm like, well,
yeah. And that's totally fair as well.
I think it's amazing. Yeah, it was
a lot of it. It always distracts me as kind of confusing that like we're having conversations like this, and it's like ultimately it's like these producers are in private business, like, and it, that's their decision to make products that they,
So
believe in and think are good.
do you think we're gonna be like in this Wild West until something bad happens? Like, let's say some sort of allergic reaction from some
I feel
infused
honestly, I feel like that should have probably happened already at this point. Like, I mean,
No, but
there's
that's assuming
lot
that
of
there's
coffee out
heaps of infused coffee out there.
I think there's a fairly large market of it, and there's definitely a massive market of like sprayed flavor coffee.
Well,
And there's been no, adverse effects of people having a flavored coffee.
yeah,
that I've
but
heard
the
of.
flavored coffees are coming from like, big companies in the consumer countries that, have to go through health checks and stuff. And it's not like some producer off somewhere without supervision adding whatever. But but speaking about
Yeah.
like how much this is happening, I think we're just at the start. I think a lot of people were doing stuff without really, mentioning what they were doing. Like I started processing around, I guess, like 2013. And the first year I was very curious about the possibilities. I started off with my dad saying that coffee is a sponge, and that, if you leave it in a warehouse, it'll absorb humidity. And then, we had an issue with a container once, that this is before Grain Pro, that the container was recently painted, and then the coffee arrived to the client with a weird smell, and we were trying to figure out what happened, and it turned out that the container was recently painted. So I started off from that point, and I wanted to see what was possible. So I bought some food grade acids and put them in water, and I would put the parchment to soak for a day, and I was doing tartaric acid, malic acid, citric acid, and you really got those flavors into the bean. But I think I did them for myself, and I wasn't selling those coffees. I just wanted to see the possibilities. But now I feel kind of like I'm missing the train, kind of, because then all these people are now selling these infusions and selling them at a very high price. So like personally this year I was like, hey, why don't we start producing some of these coffees ourselves? So I see the market changing and people asking for these coffees. And since it's become a bit more prevalent, and if I'm kind of like open about what I'm doing, then I'm not risking my reputation, I guess.
You were never closed about what you were doing, though. But aren't you missing the point that if there are infusions on the market that are achieving high prices, I don't see too many. I mean, the cinnamon thing is kind of obvious. The rest of it, I don't see it that often. And when I do, it's not often that I care, because it tastes like shit, right? So inherently for me, when I come across one that is outstanding, it is an achievement, and I do celebrate and I buy it, right? But I mean, I guess my point is, it's going back to kind of how hard it is to actually, effectively achieve a coffee infusion, I guess, in the way that we're thinking of it.
Yeah, like what you mentioned before, when you do like fruit juices with coffee, like you don't get like a very clear, like, if you put it in papaya and then you roast it, you don't get like a very clear papaya flavor. You kind of get this like fruity sense, but it's not very specific. So I found that sometimes like infused coffees, and this without the producer saying it's infused, that sometimes the green already smells like that fruit, and then it survives the roast. So that I think
that's definitely a characteristic of the successful ones. But you're assuming that they're infused.
Yeah, I'm assuming, because the green smells like the roasted, so it seems kind of
right.
unnatural. But but it's also like, I don't know the limits of fermentation, so I don't know what they did, and I don't want to be the guy who becomes like a judge, because some people seem to want to become like the judge of coffee themselves and
yeah,
decide like this is this and this is that.
That's pretty real.
Yeah, I would rather just be like, I don't know what the limit is, so I'm not gonna decide for you. Yeah.
Also,
that's the key.
the limit's pretty far. I mean,
Yeah,
if
I mean,
you're talking about
look at
achieving
all the-
flavor,
yeah.
I mean, flavors through industrious fermentation are like every single flavor syrup that you've ever had, probably.
Yeah, but then
You
the
know.
extra challenge here is like having something that survives the roast. So what I noticed with my experiments was I was soaking the coffee in all these different solutions, and then if you would do like something natural, like for example orange juice, you soak the washed coffee in orange juice and then you roast it. Something about this being like a natural product, it survives the roast and you would get this like sweet citric coffee beverage. But then I did Pepsi and who knows what chemicals are in Pepsi, and once you roast that, there's all these chemical reactions and you don't get like a you get, it was so nasty. It was
it's an interesting one, because then when you talk about stuff like geisha, which is just naturally high in linalool, which is the floral things that's in lavender and roses and lilies and jasmine, the green samples from the GMAS specs that I've read are really high in linalool, and then I mean it goes up a bit when you roast it.
Right.
So then you think like,
that's also this. I mean, it's the same compound that's in lavender essential oils.
So you could just order from a perfume supplier and like, so
this is where it gets weird though, right? Because linalool itself is present in abundance, but then the way that you experience it is drastically different between each coffee. Like some have very high amounts of it, and and then it doesn't take into account the whole thing about like personal taste and how like you can perceive it, like whether you can taste well, or however you want to call that, like whether you're an experienced coffee person or not. But yeah, like I mean, yeah, you could do that, I guess, like, but it wouldn't be the same as like a natural product, I don't think, because although that specific compound is very high in things like geisha and Ethiopian like land-raised coffees a lot of the time, it doesn't necessarily mean that that is going to be the same as, say, like the lavender linalool thing. It's in combination with other stuff. My point there is just like, yeah, I understand that things can survive a roast that are abundant, but no one really knows what like varieties, either besides geisha having high amounts of linalool, have abundance in across the board for every variety that's available.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. No one's ever mapped success. No one's ever mapped out. It would probably be impossible to do so anyway. But like, we know we're close to mapping out the outcomes of chemical reactions in roasting. I mean, we can kind of ascertain the precursors and then measure some of many of the roasted compounds, but it's far more complex than that. Like, no one's mapped a melanoidin of all of its complexity, have they? Anyway, we're getting
we get sidetracked. Yeah, it's too easy.
I think we're over 30 minutes now.
Okay.
But it was good to do it this way, kind of like unstructured. So it's just a chat. But like, do we have any sort of conclusions with this? I guess like it's hard to define where the boundary is between a fermentation and an adulteration. But I would, the easiest way to say it would be: did you do it with just the coffee and its juices and its things, or did you add something to it? That's your basic definition.
I mean, as I said earlier in the conversations that we had, I think that having defined, especially with competition, because I mean, I understand that, like, you know, if an adulterated coffee won like a prestigious competition and got a bunch of money, that would turn a lot of heads and probably change a lot of things. Like, it would have ripple effects across the industry.
They probably won already, and we just don't know.
May have, but I think it's about definition. I like the honesty thing for sure. That, like, you know, if you're selling like those products, they're great as well, like in some of the time, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're specifically talking about green competitions, they'd probably just need a category for those coffees to just cowboy in, you know, like, but they also need to have definitions of what the traditionals should be too.
Yeah, I think that's a key. Yeah, the traditional versus non-traditional is, I think, kind of it's almost just a taxonomical kind of thing that the industry has to address. Like, what are we, how are we designating things now?
Should the SBA like take on this responsibility, maybe, or
please?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I don't think they're going to do
Someone's
that.
got to do it. I
don't think that would be good for doing that either. Like,
yeah.
I mean, dude, ACE, I could see doing it, but like, that's also, you got to remember that, like, these are companies that run these competitions, that decide what and how they operate and their procedures. You know, ACE that runs COE, like, they, you know, they have their own rules, they make them, but they could also just open one more category in that competition, because but then again, it is a bit weird because you also already have naturals versus washed.
Yeah, and that might incentivize like a lot of risk taking that perhaps shouldn't be done from on the infusion front by people that can't afford to lose out on coffee or something. I don't know. Yeah, sure. I think the key takeaway for me is that it's clearly what we're really talking about is kind of reaching for that limit of fermentation to see how far we can go. And this is just one, the infusion debate, I guess, is just one element of that quest, let's say, right? And then, but I've personally always kind of wanted or kind of strived towards trying to proliferate some sort of kind of better understanding of the role of fermentation in coffee, if only to just kind of broaden people's understanding of what it is that they're actually objectively kind of into, right? To avoid a lot of this kind of elitist, purist kind of stuff that I think is unfair on producers in the first place, you know? And the more that we can kind of tell that story, I guess, the better off everyone is, you know? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, also I mean, it is, again, like, kind of, you know, it is like, as a roaster, I guess, so you have to, I mean, you do have to know, like, your clientele and what they want, you know, because, like, if your clientele want classic wash, then you're probably going to be buying a lot of it. You know, maybe you slap a infused coffee in there just to strike the bets, like this one. But yeah, like it's a really strange conversation to like put in the realms of a roaster selling coffee and purists that buy coffee, like, because I think that the broad market is pretty open to both, you know, like, there's probably as few purists as there are like that people that are specifically only wanting adulterated coffee. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I guess I don't want to like use people's we all know and buy from producers that are, you know, at the kind of the cutting edge of this stuff, and specifically in Colombia, right? One producer in particular who both of you and I know pretty well, and in my discussions with them, you know, their main kind of position is that they're sick of hearing the kind of negative feedback because the almost millions of dollars gone into kind of setting up a sustainable business on their own right deserves some sort of, you know, acknowledgement. And
sure,
you know, people in like their knowledge front, their investment rates are high, man. You know, and they're taking risks. And I think anyone that's taking risks and innovating like deserves to be applauded, not punished.
Yeah, I mean the amount of investments into our friend's place. That model is like, I mean, and the thing is that they won't stop either. Like their technology investment is hideously large. Like
it's massive, yeah.
So
and do,
I mean,
and like and that's a private.
If it's true, then like why? Like why would you put essential oils in something when you have like multi-million-dollar technology to ferment and manage like coffee input and output for a wet and dry mill? I just don't understand that. Like to go to that kind of length to understand microbiology.
The biochemistry knowledge is insane.
Well,
I get wrecked every time.
I think that I think there's a point there where like how do I say this? Like there's always going to be people doubting what producers are doing, right?
I would definitely agree. Yeah.
But let me tell you something. The most vocal dismissers of these coffees, in my experience, are individuals that have never set foot on a coffee farm. That's what got me thinking. I was like, okay, this person is defending a perception of coffee that is utterly misinformed anyway, because they don't even know how fundamental the fermentation conditions are on the coffee farms of, you know, the best washed coffees that they think they're drinking anyway, if you know what I'm trying to say. So that kind of like was a light bulb moment for me here. I was like, this person clearly thinks they understand the role and limits of fermentation to the point where they've decided that when you taste a coffee like this, it's impossible to achieve it without infusing. Right? And they're wrong. But I know that made me think, okay, right. So there's clearly something going on here with people's perceptions of what is possible.
Well, I would say, sort of like from my side as a producer, I guess I like getting into difficult situations, but like I like the challenge of focusing on varieties, and I find that like just a very nice variety grown well. Like it's a beautiful coffee, and sometimes like these macerations or like infusions, they feel kind of cheap. Like I did I soaked coffee in vanilla syrup last year, and it was very clearly like a vanilla flavor, but it one dimensional.
I remember that.
Cheap. Yeah, and it's just feels like a much more of an accomplishment to just grow a nice coffee. And process it well, but then there's nothing that's going to stop us from doing all these experiments, and it's just gonna we're at the start of it, and I think the limit might be of a government, let's say like Japan, or a country that's really tough that like investigates the green coffee arriving. Like once they start rejecting a coffee for being adulterated, I think that's going to be setting some limits. Besides that, I don't think there's any limits, and it's sort of a wild west that's just going to keep going. And so we're the next 5 years are going to be very interesting, because a lot more people are going to get into this, and there's going to be a lot more like people that have different knowledges adding to like what can be done in processing.
That's true. But I mean, it is the Wild West already. Like, for example, like I besides this, I'm pretty confident that people are just going to be blast planting Eugenioides everywhere.
Exactly.
Anywhere, like because of its like immediate
rise to fame.
Like, not just the rise to fame, but demand, and there just isn't any. And this is the exact same thing that happened with geisha, and now there's geisha everywhere in almost every country. Like people take it there because it it does well, like score wise, does well in competitions. Taste, I mean, I love it. Like, and then now we have like another type of coffee, and everyone wants it, and so everyone's going to plant it. And then also with infused coffees, people like are selling lots of it, getting reasonable prices. Now people are investing more into like fermentation and maybe infusing coffees because there's market for it. It's just going to keep going round and round and round. Next thing will be, I have no idea. Like someone is going to be like, this is the thing now.
So, I think we're approaching an hour, and we're supposed to keep it down to like 20 minutes.
20 minutes. Shit.
So I think, in conclusion,
I mean,
they were just at the start, and let's just see what happens. Huh?
Yeah,
I think the conclusion, let's keep
that's pretty much it. Yeah. I'd love to see more conversation about trying to have, like I said the last time, like country definitions of standardized practice to define both traditional, well, probably just traditional methodology, so that you can, I'm not saying to disqualify like, experimental lots that take a lot of work and effort, because I think those coffees should be rewarded. But they should compete against each other in their own category, because they're already so far out from, a traditional coffee.
Yeah, well, like when you mentioned that last time, now I remember this example of this mill that was supposed to be doing traditional washed. They were recirculating the already water, and like all, so they had all this fermentation water that was like kind of fruity, and they were moving the coffee to the patios with this water, and all their washed coffee was fruity. So yeah, it's just, I think it's all a mess, and even a traditional like process would be hard to define, and it would be like mill specific maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, but just like the ranges of stuff.
Yeah,
like not just like the range, like
this El Salvador traditional.
How much?
Washed,
like, like, is it recirculated mucilage? You say? Probably can't do that. This is washed. Like. What do you mean you can't afford an aquapulpa? Well, like, and it's totally right, because it's all circumstantial, and it's all like, person to person, especially when you're talking about small scale farming. So yeah, even then, how could you? Because then it would be in a competition, you would have rules, and then a lot of people wouldn't be able to compete in it, because you would have a definition that they can't fill.
Yeah, this is one of these great, like, I love this about coffee, because there is so much kind of, it's the beautiful intersection between an accident and history and time, you know what I mean? Like, some people kind of stipulate that the only reason like really good Ethiopians are still really good is because they just use old disc pulpers instead of mechanical ones. They put that, like, a lot of the quality down to that, and that's kind of an interesting take on things. But the fact that we can even have that conversation, I think, is kind of cool.
So okay, so like we got to end it somewhere, and I think
send us off, Dolpher, because
this will
just keep going.
No, like a good ending is we're in a very interesting time in coffee, because like imagine if we would be like 30 years back or 40 years back, you guys would just call me like, do you have high altitude coffee? Yeah, containers off, and
for sure.
we're really in a very experimental and exciting time here in coffee. So we'll see what keeps happening.
Absolutely. And the communication lines are always like, are so much closer now as well. So you're going to see a lot of like influence coming backwards from people wanting something, and then producers being able to fill their requirements, besides just being high altitude. Looking forward to any more chats about this, and thanks for
we should start a blog or a video chat.
I'm not a good writer. Like,
stop recording.
Yeah. See you guys.
See you, bro.